I knew it was time to go the moment Gerard called me loyal to a fault in front of the board like I was some office pet that needed a biscuit. I just finished presenting a quarterly growth report, 4.6 million added under my team's portfolio, 5 straight quarters of retention over 90%, and the man followed it up with that. Smug, patronizing, clapping like I'd fetched his slippers. The room chuckled. I didn't. My fingers were still wrapped around the pen I used to sign 3 new client renewals that morning, each of them tied to my own methodology, not the clunky scripts the sales tech team kept pushing like it was gospel. But I said nothing. Just smiled the way women do when we're deciding whether to burn the bridge or build a better one somewhere else. They never saw me as a risk. Not Gerard, not the board, not the junior VPs who took long lunches and pitched my workflows back to me with worse fonts and typos. They saw me as structure, predictable, safe. And I played the part for years. I was the account strategist who stayed through the merger, the layoffs, the nephew experiment. I trained 5 different assistants, covered for 6 leadership transitions, and once closed a 3.2 million client while working remote from a funeral home Wi-Fi hotspot. Because apparently, death waits, but Gerard's KPIs do not. But here's the part that'll make sense to the few paying attention. I was never safe. I was steady. That's not the same. Steady is when you document everything, train everyone, sign your contracts with clauses no one reads, and stay quiet while you're building exits no one sees. Steady is when you let the CEO call you family, even after he cuts your discretionary budget so his niece can host another Executive Insight Summit in Scottsdale with cucumber water and fewer deliverables than a kindergarten group project. I stopped being flattered around the time they made me share an intern with marketing, an intern who spelled segmentation with a Z and once asked if key accounts meant we managed keys. And just before I tell you what really changed, let me say this real quick. If you're the kind of person who loves seeing arrogant execs trip over their own contracts, hit that subscribe button and like the video. It's a small click for you, but it keeps our team digging up stories that most folks are too afraid to tell. Back to it. The offer came through a month after I had to cancel my team's annual planning offsite for budget realignment. That's when I knew they weren't just cutting costs. They were cutting us. My phone buzzed at 6:03 p.m. I remember the time because I was still at the office, alone, reworking a churn forecast Gerard had promised to glance at later. It was from a contact I hadn't heard from since the merger, now a partner at a fast-scaling firm on the other coast. They weren't just looking for an account strategist. They were looking for a partner, a builder, someone to lead from the ground up, autonomy, equity, the works, no more being the reliable one propping up someone else's PowerPoint. I didn't say yes right away. That would have been emotional. What I did was start printing my contracts, my clauses, my onboarding notes, the asset documents I'd written when we absorbed Trellis growth. Paragraph 4. God bless that clause. I'd slid it into the asset protection doc while Carter, our now ex-counsel, was too busy hosting his divorce Zoom calls from the office. No one ever noticed it. Not until it mattered. Back then, I told myself I was just future-proofing, but maybe I already knew I'd need it. Maybe I always knew Gerard's version of your family meant you'll never leave. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen family ask for your pipeline and then delete your calendar invite in the same week. So I smiled. I stayed quiet. And I kept working. But under the surface, something shifted. Every meeting, every email, every Slack message. Suddenly, I wasn't just logging activity. I was logging leverage. Because the truth is, they didn't just underestimate me. They assumed I'd always belonged to them. And that was their first mistake. The reshuffle came down like a boot to the neck. No warning, just an all-hands calendar invite with a title that read, Evolution and Excellence. That's how Gerard dressed up betrayal, in alliteration and PowerPoint. He started the call by thanking our legacy teams, which apparently now included mine, like we were some dying bloodline that needed to be pensioned off, and pivoted straight into announcing a new vision led by emerging voices. Translation. His nephew Blaine, a glorified LinkedIn influencer who once asked me if Net Promoter Score was that vibe thing clients feel. Blaine was fresh out of a sales tech bootcamp that probably handed out diplomas printed on Canva. He showed up in my office the next morning wearing Yeezys and holding an iced matcha like he was auditioning for a Hulu startup drama. Unsi says you'll loop me in on workflows, he chirped. Unk. Christ. The same Gerard who once told me, "You're the lungs of this firm." Guess we were wheezing now. They reassigned half my accounts to Blaine's disruption unit. Clients I had built from onboarding decks to multi-million-dollar renewals were now test balloons for Blaine's new relationship automation protocol, which sounded like something scraped off a crypto subreddit. He scheduled a kickoff with one of our oldest clients, Hartwell Systems, without reading their intake notes. Got the CEO's name wrong. Opened with a product pitch they'd rejected 2 years ago. Didn't even lock the Zoom room. Mid-call, some intern from a procurement wandered in asking if Blaine wanted oat milk. After the meeting, Hartwell's VP texted me directly. "You leaving too? If so, we'll talk." Just like that. I stared at that message for a solid 2 minutes. My coffee went cold. Because that wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Clients don't ask questions like that unless they've already made up their minds. That night, I pulled out the folder I'd kept hidden in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, labeled TAN Exit Strategy. Inside were copies of every key client agreement I'd helped author, red lines from past legal reviews, and a full audit of the segmentation logic I'd built from scratch. Proprietary workflows hosted under my LLC as part of a subcontractor agreement nobody remembered signing. They'd called me steady, but I was already gone. The next morning, I walked into HR like I was dropping off dry cleaning. No ceremony, no emotion. Just a signed, standard issue resignation letter dated 30 days from now. I handed it to Leanne, the only HR rep who didn't reek of office politics, and said, "Just need a confirmation of receipt." She blinked at me, confused, then opened her mouth to speak, but I was already walking out. My heels clicked like punctuation down the hallway. I didn't owe anyone a scene. I didn't tell my team. Not yet. Letting it leak too early would cause panic, and I wanted clean exits, not chaos. I finished out my day like normal, attended my meetings, sent follow-ups, even smiled at Blaine in the hallway while he pitched his 5th synergy stack idea to a potted plant because no one else would listen. That night, I wrote a personal message to my clients, not the formal one, not yet, just drafts. Calm, clear, respectful, no bridges burned, but the seed planted. I knew exactly when I'd send them. I'd already booked the calendar slot. This wasn't spite, it wasn't rage, it was logistics. I wasn't walking out bitter, I was walking out clean, and I knew exactly what would happen when they tried to keep what never belonged to them. It started with a knock, not from HR, but from the CFO himself, Jonah. Tie always too tight, eyes too busy darting between spreadsheets and shareholder decks to remember people had names. He didn't sit down, just stood in my doorway like a man delivering a foreclosure. "Just to be clear," he said, tapping the edge of my desk like a nervous metronome. "Your client list is Cressidian property. Anything you developed under our brand is proprietary, including segmentation models and client contact notes. Legal will be in touch." I blinked once. No smile, no flinch. Just looked at him until he shifted his weight like a kid caught in the wrong room. He was expecting a protest, a defense, maybe tears. What he got was silence so thick it made the overhead lights buzz louder. He left with a cough and a vague nod, muttering something about standard protocols. By noon, Gerard had called an urgent continuity sync. Classic power play. Invite the boardroom regulars, skip the calendar notice to me, thought that'd keep me in the dark. The only problem? They held the meeting in 3B, glass walls, no blinds. I watched the whole thing from my office across the hall, sipping tea like I was at a matinee. Carter, the firm's shiny new general counsel, fresh from some litigation-fueled LinkedIn TEDx circuit, leaned forward mid-table like he was proposing an airstrike. Gerard kept waving his hand like he was swatting flies. "She's going to a competitor. We lock everything. Unlock her files, pull her dashboards. Now." Carter nodded like a man who'd just been handed a sword and told to look sharp. 10 minutes later, my access to all internal systems dropped. CRM, email, my file server, Slack. Even the office printer gave me an unauthorized beep when I tried to scan my lunch receipt. Then came the kicker. They walked into my office, Carter and 2 IT guys, badge lanyards swinging, eyes everywhere but mine. Carter cleared his throat like he was reading from a damn script. "We're initiating asset recovery for compliance," he said. "Please don't interfere with the process." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just reached into my drawer, pulled out the leather folder labeled Agreements, Merger Cycle 2, and flipped to the tab with the gold paperclip. I didn't hand it to him, just tapped the page once, slow and sharp. You'll want to read paragraph 4 of the asset seizure clause, I said, voice even. Page 12, section 4.1. Carter glanced at it like I'd just handed him a crossword. He didn't read it, didn't ask. Just gave me the kind of patronizing half-smile men in 2 new suits reserved for women they think are bluffing. Then he nodded at IT and started moving toward my desktop. I stood up, not to stop him, just to make space. Because that was the moment. That exact breath in time where they could have stopped, backed off, asked a single question. But they didn't. They were so sure I was bluffing, so damn sure I was just another cog trying to walk out with a list of names and a folder of stolen sales notes. I watched Carter's fingers hover over my keyboard. He logged in using a system override, muttering something about exfiltration risk. And that's when it happened. The screen flashed. Not an error, a lockout prompt. Red banner, bold font. Legal hold triggered, subsection 4.1 protective flag engaged. He froze. Looked at the IT guy like the system had glitched. The guy just shrugged and said, "It's real-time encrypted. We can't mirror her folders. It's locked." Carter's eyes flicked back to me. Still, I said nothing. Because when you've buried the mine yourself, you don't need to warn anyone. You just let them walk. They thought it was a glitch, some system's hiccup from the merger that never got patched. Carter kept clicking through menus like brute force would somehow override a clause hard-coded with teeth. The IT lead, a contractor named Miguel who knew just enough not to poke the bear, glanced at me as if to say, "Should I tell him?" I didn't nod. I didn't need to. Let them flail. Let them dig. Carter finally leaned in, squinting at the screen like the code itself had personally insulted him. A yellow warning pulsed faintly across the top. Legal hold engaged. Asset under independent protections. Access restricted per subsection 4.1. He exhaled through his nose like a man who suddenly realized the safe he was prying open was booby-trapped. "Pull her onboarding docs," he snapped at Miguel. I could hear them muttering in the hall, rummaging through shared drives and archived PDFs like raccoons in a dumpster, all while pretending they weren't scrambling. Meanwhile, I sat in my office, locked out of everything except my private inbox and the folder I'd downloaded to a clean drive weeks ago. I watched the reflection of Carter pacing behind the glass wall, elbows sharp, voice rising. It took them 20 minutes to find it, 40 to read it, an hour before someone finally knocked. He didn't come in, just held up the page through the glass with one finger jabbing at the paragraph. Paragraph 4.1, it read. In the event of seizure attempts during competitive exit, any proprietary asset linked to the client list shall revert to the named strategist, voiding all binding exclusivity, access, or transfer privileges held by the parent organization. I saw it hit him then, not just what it meant, but when it happened. That clause was older than Carter's employment contract. Slipped in 3 years ago during the Trellis acquisition, when Cressidian needed to lock in client continuity and no one had time to argue over red lines. Back then, I was the only strategist who stayed. Everyone else either quit or got phased out during integration. Gerard never read the appendices. He rubber-stamped the merger docs after 3 bourbons and a golf outing with Trellis's CFO. Now he was in 3B again, slouched in his chair, rubbing his forehead with both hands while Carter tried to spin it. I watched through the glass as Gerard leaned back and muttered, "She slipped this in?" "No, Gerard," I placed it. Carter tried the usual lawyer tap dance, intent, ambiguity, applicability, but Miguel, poor kid, pulled up the time-stamped audit trail, my name, my original language, a signature chain with legal approvals including Gerard's own initials scrawled beside a date 4 weeks post-merger. "That's not enforceable," Gerard snapped. Carter didn't answer right away. He just reread the clause, jaw twitching. "The way it's written," he finally said, "if we proceed, we're in breach." Gerard slammed his palm on the table. "Breach of what? We own the damn files." "No," Carter said, quieter this time. "We own the infrastructure, the segmentation logic, the lead tags, the workflow matrices. Those are nested under her LLC's subcontractor framework. She never assigned them outright." The room went still. I watched as Gerard's mouth moved, but nothing came out. They'd built so much on top of my foundation, they forgot it wasn't theirs. Every dashboard, every client flag, every note taken in my system, every workflow they bragged about at investor summits. All written, hosted, and protected under terms they never bothered to revisit. And now they were standing in a minefield they thought was a meadow. I leaned back, crossed my arms, and let them stew. Because arrogance makes you blind. But paperwork? Paperwork never blinks. Carter came back the next morning with a folder clutched so tight his knuckles looked bloodless. No swagger, no legalese, just quiet steps and a mouth locked in neutral. He didn't come to argue. He came to surrender. He just hadn't figured out how to say it yet. "We finished the review," he said, voice low like we were discussing funeral arrangements instead of contract law. "You technically own the segmentation logic and the prospecting workflows," and he trailed off. "The compliance protocols, too." I didn't say anything. Just watched him try to get through the sentence without choking on it. "The algorithm you use to tier and retain key clients, it's proprietary," he muttered. "Filed under your LLC, the subcontractor agreement from Trellis, buried in the onboarding docs. We didn't see it until we traced the data tags back to their metadata structure." That part made me smile, though I kept it tucked behind my coffee cup. Metadata never lies, and I'd spent 3 years writing a logic tree so specific that every time someone clicked a client's status, it pinged a path that ended with a quietly updated clause I'd added back when the CTO was too lazy to strip inherited architecture. A breadcrumb trail of ownership, digital ink in permanent marker. Carter set the folder down like it was radioactive. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Finally, I looked at him. "Yes," I said. Calm. Factual. I did. By lunch, Gerard was in my doorway with the kind of false confidence only a man cornered and still pretending he had a choice could muster. His tie was crooked, his voice too loud. He waved a waiver form in front of me like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Let's just make this clean, Alicia. Sign this. Waive the clause. We'll consider it a clerical misstep. You keep your reputation intact, and nobody has to get messy." I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just stood, walked around my desk, took the paper in both hands, and tore it clean in half. "As per Clause 4, I said, letting the pieces fall between us. "I'm not obligated." He stared at the paper like he could will it back together, then at me like he'd never really seen me. And maybe he hadn't. Maybe he'd spent so long looking down, he'd forgotten how leverage works when the person holding it doesn't flinch. The email from Hartwell Systems hit legal's inbox an hour later. Subject: termination of contract, effective immediately. Body: due to Cressidian's attempt to seize assets tied to our strategic consultant, we are invoking breach terms under Section 3.2. Our business relationship ends today. All future communications will be directed to our new partner firm. Signed, Elena Hartwell, SVP Strategic Partnerships. I read the forward of it on my phone while Gerard shouted into a conference call across the hall. I could hear phrases like contain fallout and realign comm strategy echoing against the glass, like trying to duct tape a dam. My phone buzzed again. 2 more clients, soft pings from contacts I'd worked with for years. Not dramatic, not angry, just quiet transitions. Because loyalty, like silence, is earned. And mine had already moved on. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat there in my office, locked out of their systems, yes, but watching the slow, elegant collapse of their illusion that I had ever belonged to them. Turns out, you can't force ownership on what was never yours to begin with. By Thursday morning, the panic was no longer behind glass. It spilled into the hallways, into inboxes, into hurried footsteps and whispered huddles around unlocked screens. I wasn't even on the premises anymore, but I didn't need to be. Chaos has a sound. I could hear it echoing through the silence of my phone as unread messages stacked up like sandbags before a flood. It started when Jonah, the CFO who once tapped my desk like it was his, forwarded a revenue impact report to the board with 2 words in the subject line: immediate threat. The report was blunt. 60% of Cressidian's active revenue pipeline was classified under what legal was now calling the independent methodology framework. a name they invented to avoid saying Alicia's system. What that really meant was this. Every client segmented by my logic, contacted through my prospecting models, and nurtured through my tailored retention workflows had been bound, not by contracts, but by trust. Trust backed by a structure I built. Structure I owned. Structure they couldn't touch without detonating Clause 4.1. The board had questions. Investors had more. One of them demanded an emergency valuation update. The number came back slashed. A 34% drop overnight. Not theoretical, not projected, actual. Carter tried. Bless him. He tried to spin it. Said the clause's original intent was ambiguous. Said it was meant to be symbolic, not enforceable. Said no reasonable person would interpret it as an ownership transfer. Then Miguel, the same IT contractor who watched this storm build from the inside, uploaded a compressed archive from my server audit trail, time-stamped, labeled, signed, reviewed, approved. Every workflow labeled TAN Logic 2.0, every segmentation protocol version controlled and linked to an external license agreement. My initials, my LLC, their oversight. Carter's voice cracked, trying to explain that one. Legal finally called the security team. By then, Gerard had snapped. Full meltdown mode. He ordered client communications frozen, trying to salvage whatever scraps hadn't already drifted across the line. Lock her out of vendor lists, audit the Slack exports, disable external emails. But I was already gone. And the clients? They weren't mine to begin with, not legally, not operationally. So in my final email, one I queued to send exactly 3 minutes after my resignation cleared HR, I didn't pitch, I didn't beg. I just wrote one line right above my signature. Your data stays with you. I never collected anything you didn't already share. No secrets, no exports, no spreadsheets stolen in the dark, just clean exits, clean lines, because I didn't need to take anything. I was the system, and they just tried to lock me out of my own blueprints. While Gerard shouted down a board call and Carter paced holes in the carpet, I sat in a quiet co-working space downtown, sipping a cappuccino made by someone who didn't know my name and didn't care what I used to do. My inbox lit up, one message after another, subject lines like transfer inquiry and follow-up to our last call. None of them dramatic, all of them inevitable. Because clarity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just what's left standing when the noise burns itself out. And in that silence, it became painfully obvious. I hadn't stolen anything. They'd just never paid attention to what they gave away. They say you can hear it when a machine finally dies, not just the whirring stop, but the quiet after. That's what Cressidian felt like from a distance. The hum stopped. The posture broke. Gerard's kingdom, all glass and bravado, flickered for the first time in years. And it wasn't the clients, or the revenue, or even the clause that did it. It was the silence that followed, where loyalty used to live. I didn't need insider updates. They bled themselves dry in plain sight. Jonah started distancing first. Classic CFO shuffle. He leaked a resource misalignment memo to investor relations. Thinly veiled blame directed squarely at Carter. A compliance manager resigned 2 days later. The head of client success went on medical leave. And the VP of sales canceled 3 speaking engagements and quietly scrubbed Cressidian from his LinkedIn header. The empire was rotting from the inside out. The board held a closed-door, off-cycle emergency call. Gerard didn't even lead it. They brought in outside counsel finally to audit what Carter had greenlit, and the outside counsel didn't mince words. Yes, they confirmed. The clause is valid. The signature trail is sound. The protections were contractually enforceable. You attempted seizure of a classified proprietary asset. They use the word seizure, not retrieval, not review, seizure. Carter submitted his resignation less than 24 hours later. No farewell email, no exit interview, just a single sentence to legal, effective immediately. Gerard tried to reach me the next day, called twice, then emailed, then texted. Subject lines like need clarity and let's discuss options and finally, pathetically, maybe we went too far. I never responded. There was nothing left to say, because by then I wasn't just gone. I was elsewhere, across town, keycard in hand, stepping through the glass doors of a boutique firm that didn't exist until I signed the founding documents. My name's on the letterhead now. Not strategist, not account lead, not legacy talent. Founding partner. We don't do legacy, we do intent. Clean, lean, and vertical. No nephews, no board theater, no scrambling to pretend people matter when it's already too late. My new office has no desk clutter, no fake awards, just a potted snake plant I haven't named, and a team of 3 people who still ask before forwarding a pitch. We built the infrastructure from scratch. Same logic, same segmentation, only cleaner. Owned, not borrowed. Transparent, not tucked behind HR firewalls. My inbox pings sometimes, old names, clients, vendors, even a few former teammates from Cresidian asking if I'm open to lunch. Sometimes I am, but most days I'm too busy actually building, not for applause, not for revenge, just because I finally can. 2 weeks. That's how long it took before the first real cracks split Cresidian's illusion of control wide open. The firm's top 3 accounts, Hartwell Systems, Brintech, and Calder Dynamics, moved to our new firm without a single fight. No legal threats, no dragged-out arbitration, just polite notices, signed transfers, and clean exits. Contracts weren't breached. They were concluded, because they had always been tied to method, not name. And the method followed me. Gerard tried to spin it, of course, told the board it was inevitable attrition, that clients sometimes get swept up in transition, as if 3 multi-million-dollar accounts spontaneously packed up and walked. But the damage was too precise, too strategic. Someone finally started pulling threads on the internal audit trail. That's when it surfaced. The fact that Gerard never read the full merger documentation, not when we acquired Trellis, not when I stayed behind to stabilize the fallout, not when I proposed the subcontractor amendments during harmonization review, a phrase he once mocked while brushing crumbs off a conference room bagel. The audit report hit like a dropped safe, itemized, time-stamped. My clause in black and white, highlighted in a PDF that had sat untouched in the shared drive folder labeled Legal Archive Trellis Old, dated 3 years ago. Last opened by Gerard. Never. The board didn't need a villain. They needed an exit. They labeled it strategic mismanagement and wrapped the whole thing in legal insulation. Gerard was quietly moved into consultative transition. No statement, no farewell. Just a disappearing act wrapped in HR gloss. He left behind a Slack channel filled with ghosted threads and a seat at the quarterly update that no one wanted to sit in. The final straw wasn't even mine. It came from a junior associate named Nia, who found the clause again while cross-checking an unrelated compliance review. She printed it, highlighted the operative paragraph, and dropped it on the desk of the remaining board chair with a sticky note that just read, "We should have read this." The next morning, the final investor memo went out. Subject: Governance Review. Action required. Body: a clause is just words, until someone reads it. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no smug monologue, just a quiet moment alone in my office, watching the dashboard as client transitions hit 100% migration. The board could blame Gerard, Gerard could blame Carter, Carter could blame buried PDFs. But none of that mattered, because I didn't twist arms, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't take anything I wasn't already owed. I just followed the terms, the same ones they signed, the same ones they never read. The office is quiet. Not the kind of quiet you fill with music or chatter or nervous keystrokes, but the kind that settles into your bones, a clarity. No clutter, no awards, just a matte black desk, a chair that doesn't squeak, and a single mug with no branding. The floors hum faintly from the HVAC. Outside the window, the city moves without urgency. And inside, I sit alone, logged in, breathing the stillness that comes when nothing chases you anymore. My inbox pings once, an envelope icon in the corner of the screen. I open it without ceremony. A scanned letter from a former colleague at Cresidian. One I trained. One who stayed behind. They still can't figure out how you pulled it off. No signature. Just that one line, like the last gasp of a company too proud to admit it wasn't paying attention. I stare at it for a moment, then type my reply. I didn't pull anything. I just let them push. Send. It's not a victory lap, it's a record scratch. Because when people don't believe you're preparing, they'll call the outcome magic. They always do. It's easier than admitting they missed the setup, the signs, the structure. I glance at my dashboard. 7. 7 clients, all with fresh multi-year agreements, legally clean, ethically sound, each one structured with independent redundancies and client-owned data repositories. No dependency on me, no handcuffs disguised as service tiers, just partnerships, on their terms and mine. That's the whole point. Not revenge, not empire building, just something that lasts because it was built right the first time. A soft buzz from the smart lock lets me know the junior partners have arrived. They'll get to work while I review strategy decks. Nothing flashy. No handshakes in front of rented logos. Just work that speaks louder than promises. And somewhere across the river, I imagine Gerard pacing in an office he no longer owns, surrounded by broken NDAs and half-burned bridges, still asking the wrong questions. Doesn't matter anymore. I lean back, close the dashboard, and let the room fall silent again. Final thought as the sun hits the edge of my desk. You can't seize what you never owned.